Coming to you from Guthrie City Hall, this is the Roundup.
Hello and welcome to the second floor of City Hall here in beautiful downtown Guthrie for our last installment of the Roundup. I'm your host, Chris Evans, and once again, we're joined by Representative John Pfeiffer and Senator AJ Gay-Griffin. We invited Representative Murphy. He was unable to attend again. But guys, welcome back. And the first session is over, and it was a long, entertaining at times, and a long night, early morning type session for you guys this year.
It's over.
It's over. Thank goodness. I'm glad you were entertained. I was mostly just frustrated. The state's had some serious financial times. It's no secret. Press conferences, Twitter, unfortunately, is probably not the best way to hash these things out. And that's what we got most of this session. A lot of talk and not a lot of action.
And Senate Bill 860 was, the talk and the budget and the general appropriations and gross production tax and lateral drilling, all that good stuff. And both of you voted for the budget. It's not. You both told me it's not a perfect budget, but it's what we work with because we didn't have what we wanted at the beginning, so it was kind of a Plan B type deal.
To say that I'm disappointed in what we were able to accomplish in the last month of the session would be an understatement. I'm just extremely disappointed that we weren't able to get enough votes, that the 3/4 majority required in both chambers in order to move some revenue raisers along. I think most Oklahomans understand that we are having a difficult time with the revenues available, meeting the needs of our citizens and the type of government services that they want. And so to say that I'm disappointed is an understatement. We had disagreements between the two chambers. We had big disagreements within the minority and the majority party in the House, and that's just the way that those are the rules of the game that we play right now. And so none of us, I don't think, when we finished, we're happy with any of it.
Is it like that a typical year, or did it stick out a little bit more this year?
It definitely stuck out a little more this year. I know we talked in an earlier episode about if Minority Leader Inman runs for governor, how's this going to play out? Well, I think we saw exactly how this is going to play out. The unwillingness to negotiate, unwillingness to make even slight compromises, lots and lots and lots of press conferences, taking things from negotiations, immediately running out to the press and saying, this is what we offered, and we said no, this is what happened in the room, things like that. I told a group in Blackwell a couple weeks ago that if we could lock everybody in a room, take away their cell phones and not let them out, and not actually report what's going on in the room, we'd be far better off. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. Anything said behind closed doors is soon brought out to the open. I know when Representative Inman debated against most things, it was interesting to me, his tweets would pop up while he was actually debating.
Right.
It seems like he's far more interested in scoring political points, shoring up his base, especially going into what I can only assume is going to be a very tough Democrat primary, than actually solving some fundamental problems that on both sides of the aisle we agree we have in state government.
It's been pretty easy for us to use Representative Inman and Leader Inman as a scapegoat, but I want to point out that he wasn't the only one that was voting no on the revenue raisers. There were lots of Republicans that did the same in both chambers. We had a better numbers game in the Senate. We had 3/4 of our caucus, and it was enough votes in order for us to pass any revenue raising measures, and we were able to move some of those things along. But there were 22 members of the Republican caucus on the House side that, because of ideology or they feel like they're representing their constituency, weren't able to address the pressing needs that we have in state government right now.
A lot of times, especially in government, we let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think a lot of that happened this year. We keep talking about the budget's definitely not perfect. Might not even be a good budget, but it's what we have. A lot of these revenue-raising measures weren't my first idea. It's not the first thing I would have done. But because of the problems we have, when you put them up on the board to move the ball forward and to try to move the state in the right direction, you have to vote yes, and it's tough to do that when your ideology doesn't agree with that. Sometimes we have to put practical things and practical measures and the needs of actual Oklahomans above ideology. The only people I know of who used to put ideologues on boards were the actual Politburo, and the Soviet Union didn't end up so well. We live in a practical world where real-time events affect what we have to do. And unfortunately, not everybody in our chamber or the Senate chamber sees it that way.
Before we dive into the budget and the particulars of it, does Oklahoma have a budget problem or a revenue problem or a spending problem, or a little mixture of everything? Because this is, another shortfall this year. Some anticipate another shortfall next year. Maybe not, hopefully not as much, but.
I don't think we have a spending problem. And I know that there are a lot of people that would say we still do. You can always be more effective and more efficient. We can always do things better, and we should definitely work every single year towards being more effective. But for the size of state that we have and the number of people that we're providing services to, we're not spending too much at this point. Now, maybe we need to rearrange how we're spending some of those dollars, but the size of our state budget is actually on the small side when we compare ourselves to other states that are comparable in population. That's why we're not getting the service level that we want. That's why we don't feel like our schools are adequately funded, or that we're making progress in other areas such as mental health treatment. That's why we're worried about the condition of our prison system and the working conditions for our prison guards. So I'll say we're not too big, but we can always be better. So that means that we either need to redistribute the money we have differently, or we need to spend more money. Those are the only other two options.
And it really is going to have to be a combination of both of those. I mean, we've talked at length before about apportionments. Now we only spend between a third and to 40% of actual money that comes into the state. We're going to have to start taking that seriously. Apportionments go to very real problems, teachers' retirement, roads and bridges, things like that. But in times like this, we have to reevaluate it. And not that it's much consolation after this year's budget, the fact that we do have staunch Republicans in our state coming out and saying we have a revenue problem is a huge step forward. Now, is it far enough? No. Is it everything we need? No. But admitting you have a problem, or getting people to admit you have a problem, is always the first step. And for the first time in state history that I can think of, Republicans are saying, no, we actually have a revenue problem. And we've got a slight constitutional problem too. So much of the stuff that we talk about, and so much of the things that people say we waste money on, we can't actually control, because higher ed's a perfect example. I know a lot of the people who sit to the right of me say we're wasting tons of money in higher ed administration. They could be right. I don't know, because I haven't looked too far into it, because the way it is right now and the way it's set up by the Oklahoma Constitution, we can only appropriate a lump sum to the Board of Regents for higher education, and they get to decide where it goes from there. When you have the sixth largest constitution in the world, from time to time you're going to get into some places where it ties your hand, especially in tough budget years like this.
$6.9 billion budget. And without going through the line items, general impression, it was like, okay, where would I move money? It was like, yeah, this is a little bit more than I thought, because without looking at the line items, you can't take away from here. But the budget, 16, the core were protected for the most part. The other agencies could see 4 to 5% cut. And a big part with that, I think it was the House, $18 million, I guess, from the rainy day fund to save some of the education. Education was a big topic with the budget, because the teacher raise we talked about in the months leading up to the legislative session and then in the prior never came true for a teacher pay raise.
Not this session. I think one of the things you'll see is, and when my conversations with a lot of educators, is fund us at least a regional average, meaning education as a whole, and then let's take that on. Now, if you look at the way that we fund teachers and we pay for teachers in the state, there's a pretty big variety of salaries across the state. We have a lot of districts that pay pretty well. In fact, right down the road in Stroud, the starting salary is $5,000 above the minimum. That kind of highlights some of the inequity in school funding that we're starting to unearth. And when I start looking at the research I've done on school funding, we have rich districts and we have poor districts, but trying to change that, man, you want to start a firestorm, because you have to rearrange the funds. So we've still got to continue to talk about it, but it's kind of a moot point until we have the revenues available. We got to be able to pay for it without necessarily just stealing it from another agency. If you fund the core services of government, and we do that at an adequate level, we would need to zero out all of the rest of government. And when I say core, that means that's not including things like, just the Department of Agriculture, which oversees our second largest industry. It doesn't include the Corporation Commission, which oversees our first largest industry. So we're pretty lean.
Yeah.
If you could have told me a couple months ago that we could have got out of the session funding the 15 core functions and everybody else only getting a 4.2 to 4.5% cut, I would have been surprised. I honestly thought it was going to be a lot worse. That being said, we're still going to have a problem. We still used about $400 million worth of one-time monies, which means we're looking at least a $400 million shortfall when we go back in next year. The budget itself and how the money gets appropriated to these agencies isn't bad, but when you don't fix the underlying problems, it's the same thing year after year. We've taken some long-term steps, things that'll help us in the long term, moving back the zero-emission tax credits on wind. A little unfair to districts like mine that have a lot of wind, but sometimes you have to do that for the long-term health of the state. The problem is in the short term, we still have a revenue problem.
And the House dipped into the rainy day from $18 million for the teachers' retirement. Is that right? Or insurance, health insurance, or?
It's a supplemental to make sure that we cover their cost of their benefits.
Okay. Okay.
And it's also important to point out in education funding, it looks like when you look at the spreadsheets and stuff, they got a slight bump, and it's because it is. We went back and funded to the beginning of last fiscal year's budgets, before the revenue raising or before the revenue failures that took money out of their budgets at various times of the year. So we funded them at the start of 2017 levels, which is important. It's what we promised to do. Is it enough? Probably not, but is it what we can get done this year? It's good.
Two bills that got a lot of attention, both in oil and gas, Senate Bill 867 and House Bill 2429, gross production tax, 1% to 4%, and I don't. One of you told me it's only like 11% of the wells that they were talking about, 1 to 4% before going to the full 7%. That was a big deal. I know Representative Inman and the Democrats were really big on the gross production tax, and it was kind of a tactic deal that they were going with throughout the entire session.
It does seem to be the drum that they kind of beat a lot. Basically what we did when, I believe it was back in 2014, they moved the tax incentives on all new wells producing from 1% to 2% for
36 months.
36 months. The numbers are all running together at this point. And basically all those, there's 5,790 wells still producing at 1%. For at the most about 18 months. We took all of those wells, moved them up to 4%, so they're going to be taxed at 4% up until they make the jump to the full 7%.
And this stuff gets really kind of complicated because one of the things when we realized is that in the House they weren't going to be able to get the 3/4 majority for true revenue raisers. This was an incentive rate that we were able to change with just 51 votes. So finding revenue raisers that we could actually implement that only required 51 votes to still be constitutional was a challenge. This was one of the things we could come up with. Another one was elimination of some rebates that were incentive programs as well that we could get rid of. You know, one of the things that they kept saying is we want you to raise the gross production rate on all wells. Well, couple problems with that. Number one, it would have required 3/4 majority vote, and you also can't make some of those things retroactive because it wasn't an incentive rate. It actually is the rate, so you really can't go backwards with some of that. So it gets really technical with what we're allowed to do and how many votes each type of change makes.
Yeah, it's really difficult to look at, to digest it all, and you listen to different people talk, this side and this side, and you're trying to decipher what, you know, Oklahomans have helped out the oil and gas. Now they're like, is the oil and gas helping out Oklahomans at their toughest time? It's just back and forth.
It is, and a lot of things go into it. I mean, it's not just the gross production tax rate. You got to look at how we actually tax minerals. We tax it at the wellhead through gross production. Other states don't. You got to look at the tax on oil field services, things like that. And at the end of the day, in budget years like this, you got to look at how much money it actually brings into the general revenue to fix some of the problems we have. Raising gross production tax doesn't bring that much money into general revenue. Now, doing away with the oil and gas rebates, like Senator Griffin talked about, brought in $46 million this year. and $46 million for the rest of the time because we don't have to pay these out anymore. Bringing it, raising gross production on wells taxed at 1% to 4%, that brings in a significant amount of money on an old rebate that we could do this year. Raising it on wells that go forward and stuff like that, the numbers just weren't there. We actually dinged the oil for those people who wanted, to get an ounce of blood out of oil and gas. We did it, and we actually were able to bring in more money from the state this way than raising gross production tax.
And it's interesting. The other thing that gets lost is the fact that the oil is not owned by the oil company. It's owned by the mineral owners.
Yes.
And so they want to stick it to the man that's making all this money. I'm like, well, that's the guy who's getting paid to get it out of the ground by the people who actually own it, the mineral owners, which are a lot of times just regular Oklahomans that happen to be fortunate enough to have had that passed down through their family for many years. That's who's really paying gross production. You can say you want to stick it to Continental and oil and Devon Resources all you want. That's not really who's paying gross production.
And the other part was that Senate Bill 867, which horizontal drilling out took a lot. And some numbers I saw, the Oklahoma Energy Act 2017, 9.4 to the general fund and 4.7 to both counties and schools. And more jobs.
It's a change in technology that's now available to allow those long laterals to go out a couple miles. Better for the environment because you're doing a lot less damage at the ground site. One of my concerns whenever that would come up, I asked lots and lots of questions about seismicity, of course, because that's so
asking that question on the floor.
So relevant to my district. Serving Logan County in Pawnee, the site of Oklahoma's largest earthquake. I'm going to ask lots of questions. There's no indication right now that long laterals will have any additional impact on seismicity at all. We have done a great job as a state addressing the real issue with seismicity, which is wastewater disposal. And really long laterals won't necessarily be used in some of those plays, but it's going to allow us to get more oil out of the same hole.
Mm-hmm. With less surface impact. And I think that's a huge point. It's something that I brought up because it gets missed a lot of this time when we debate about this stuff. Is someone who has to farm around oil wells, it's a pain. I mean, you're happy because you're getting a little bit of mailbox money. You're doing some things. It's offsetting it on the cash flow side. But the fact that we can shoot these wells out 2 miles now, you're still going to get the same amount of money. You're still going to increase production for the mineral owners who actually own the oil, and it's going to be less surface impact that tears up less farm ground. It's a good deal. Not to mention the fact that most of the other major energy producing states are doing this. To stay competitive, we have to keep up with these kinds of technologies.
And both of you voted yes on that. Representative Murphy voted no on that. Okay, I stayed up late till midnight with you, and the 1 o'clock deal, I'm watching you guys on the internet. I made the JCAB fine, but you guys went past 1 o'clock. I shut it off at 12:55. I was sleepy. But a lot of things, I don't know how to look at it, but the budget and that JCAB came at 11:14. The email came through 11:14. Was that, the Democrats were upset about it because here's this $6.9 billion thing you're about to look at, and you have 30 minutes to go over it, no line items. Did they have an argument in that, or was that probably not the right way to do it? Or
it's normally handled a little better than we handled it this year.
Okay.
Because of the very real threat of going into special session, we had to pass it that night. And special session costs the taxpayers of Oklahoma an additional $30,000 a day every day we're in special session. Should we have worked on some of these ideas a little sooner? Should we have rolled it out in a little better way? Possibly, but because of the way the House rules are, we had to be finished by midnight on that night. Yep. And the people who say they don't know what's in it, you don't know the 100% the words that are in it, but the spreadsheets that we worked off of, that we've been working off of all year during these budget negotiations, I knew what the numbers were that were in it. I knew where we were, what revolving funds we were taking money out of. I knew what revolving funds we were putting stuff back into, and I knew what my agencies were funded at. And the minority party did too. I mean, we were all working off the same spreadsheet. Is it the way I wish it would have happened? No, and I hope we do a better job in the future. But when everybody's already working off the same playbook, you can go ahead and push those things through, even though I would have liked to have seen a little more time for questions and things like that, because it is the biggest bill we do all year. We should have a little more time in JCAB to discuss it. But that being said, everybody knew what was in the bill.
I'm going to say this, a lot of the people that complain the loudest about not having enough time to review it, they wouldn't have reviewed it if they'd had it 2 weeks out.
No anyway.
So it's kind of irrelevant. we knew and I was really pleased. The subcommittee that I chair actually saw a 6.34% increase in funding. That includes the Department of Human Services. So it's not quite enough to backfill some of the federal cuts that we've taken, because the state has taken a significant hit just in the Medicaid program, and this is important for people to understand that we're concerned that we didn't expand Medicaid, but our federal match for Medicaid has gone down every year for the last couple of years. And so when that happens, to do the same services, the state has to put in more money. We weren't able to fully fund that with the numbers that we had. But I had enough time to run a trailer bill that line item to the Department of Human Services budget. It wound up not getting taken up in the House, which for lots of reasons, but there was plenty of time if the members had been doing their homework and staying up on the process the entire time. There was enough time.
Before I forget, you brought up DHS. I saw they're getting funded at $700 million, but still, I saw they're $33 million short of their obligations. Is that
$33 million short of backfilling the loss of federally funding, plus of a couple of other growing obligations. We're doing a great job as a state right now getting kids adopted out of the foster care system, but it's really hard to keep up with the growth in that cost, because those kids still cost money through adoption subsidy payments. The foster care payments continue after a child adopted, and not a lot of Oklahomans understand that. We'll have to continue to address that. They're still going to have to do some cuts internally, but overall they actually did see an increase in funding.
And we had a happy adoption Guthrie too.
Yes, we
so
did.
absolutely.
Congratulations,
Yes.
Jillian.
Yes.
I think Senator's absolutely right. The people who yell the loudest about this stuff are the ones who choose not to be involved in the process. We started way back in January on the House side, holding basically unprecedented budget meetings with the largest agencies. Throughout the process, we call them round robin budget meetings, where people would get outside their subcommittees, visit different subcommittees, and learn about it. The one thing I learned very quickly is that most people don't care about my subcommittee because we didn't have very many people show up. The agencies took their time to come out and explain their budgets. I took my time to hold these meetings and listen to the same stuff, and then to turn around and have those very same people say, well, we don't know what's going on in the budget. Games are won by those who show up. If you really care about the budget process and want to do something more than complain about it, then you're going to show up to these meetings. I've never seen anybody turned away from a meeting because they say, oh, you're not supposed to be in here.
A couple revenue things to talk about here. The cigarette fee, Senate Bill 845, House got by 5245, and Senate was 2818. Both of you voted yes on it, and the Democrats were all about it, and just not their way, I guess. But a lot of no votes. So Representative Murphy also voted no. But going to generate $100 million. The Democrats have always been talking about they want to do this. I guess they were just trying to play hardball. How they got it. The bargaining deal.
The last numbers actually. Well, it would have been $257 million, but we didn't get the emergency, so it's about 215. Of course, if it stands, this is actually a test to see.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, how far we can go.
Yeah.
Probably the last two sessions, the vote on the tobacco tax has been my most frustrating experience. The Democrat caucus in the House did the exact same thing last year. So yeah, we're all about revenue and properly funding health care in the state of Oklahoma, and then they vote no on what is a health care tax. I call it prepayment for the cost of your health care later in life. We know that cigarette smoking is Oklahoma's #1 cost driver whenever it comes to paying for health care. The #1 thing that makes healthcare in Oklahoma cost more is the number of Oklahomans that smoke cigarettes, and so the fee is intended to discourage people from taking up smoking in the first place and try to get some folks to quit. And there is a significant amount of evidence that says cost actually is a huge indicator in the number of people that take up smoking. The more it costs, the fewer people that are going to do it.
Oklahoma Tobacco Cessation Act of 2017, I think is what we're calling it, is actually a policy bill. It's an anti-smoking policy bill, and that's how we were able to use it to only get 51 votes. The fee is just a small part of it to try to discourage people from smoking. It also has a whole lot of other anti-smoking policy in there. That being said, it really is going to be a test. It will be challenged by the large tobacco companies. Basically, the Supreme Court's going to have to decide, does it have enough policy in there to justify the fee to make it a policy bill rather than a revenue-raising bill, or is this a revenue-raising bill with a bunch of policy attached?
Because by law, you can't do it within the last 5 days of the
right.
legislative session.
Yeah, ironically, during that negotiations, we had suddenly the number of 67 cents came. And we were told by the representatives of tobacco companies, if you'll just run a tobacco tax of 67 cents, we won't oppose it, and we'll tell the Democrats to vote for it. Well, that's the sweet spot. It's not enough of an increase to get people to change their behavior. So there's an awful lot of, there's gamesmanship, there's input that comes from not just the members, but that was one that the healthcare community just did not go for that at all. They said that's not enough. We want it to be more, and it really wasn't about the money. It's about the long-term cost of smoking and what it cost Oklahomans.
Excuse my ignorance, but is vaping considered tobacco?
No.
Okay.
The FDA has yet to make that determination.
Okay. All right. I in my circle, the cigarettes, I don't see as many people smoking cigarettes, which is great. And just think, you used to go to restaurants and people would have, there's ashtrays there. Right. It's weird to think how long ago, but it is still there. So. Vaping popped in my head real quick. Another thing that was the motor vehicle fee, basically a 1.25% sales tax on top of what you were doing, excise tax, all that good stuff.
It's actually doing away with a sales tax exemption.
Okay.
Because historically in Oklahoma we have used the excise tax to tax vehicles. So we were able to do away with the sales tax exemption, which only required 51 votes. And it increases the cost of new and used vehicles 1.25%, which to be paid at the tag office. Again, when you can't get everybody on board to pass better ideas, and you're trying to balance a budget, you're left with choosing the best bad idea out there. The speaker said several times, the state budget's like a buffet, and all we have to choose from is vegetables at this point.
Yeah.
And this was something that kind of came up that we were going through after negotiations stalled out either the second or third time. I can't remember, that we were going back through sales tax exemptions that we could roll back with 51 votes and looking at. This still makes us competitive with other states. As far as sales and excise tax put together out of a regional average, we are last. We will still be last from all the states that surround us. It's just going to be slightly more expensive when purchasing a vehicle.
Yeah,
if anybody decides to drive to Texas to save money on this 1.25, well, you're not going to save any money because the property tax in Texas is going to be a lot higher.
And someone told me you have to have your address has to match with where you. I don't know what, but both of you voted yes on that one. All these fees and all this stuff. This will hold up. And I've learned something, that a special session could be called upon, but doesn't mean representative senators have to go back. And if they don't go back, it's just cuts across all the agencies almost.
If there were to be a special session called, in the way either the governor or both chambers collectively can call special session has to be a single subject. So you don't go back and just take up policy issues. You have to know why you're called back and what you'll be voting on. And so there is a concern that if we do need to go back into special session to address revenues, that the same people who voted no won't show up.
Yeah.
It's just easier not to go and really address the pressing problems of the state.
And you still need the 76 votes.
Still have to have 76 votes. There are not any good options left at this point. Hopefully maybe some of the tension between the negotiating parties will have eased if we have to take a little break. We'll just have to wait and see, and if we're called back, I'm sure the two of us will go.
And I know the question that you were kind of gearing up for there. No, this doesn't fix our problems. We're nickel and diamond $20 problems here. We have an apportionment issue and we have a revenue issue in the state, and mainly because our tax code does not match our economy. And until we get serious of that from all levels of state government. I know the governor said that in her State of the State speech, and it sounds nice to say it, but until you come up with an actual plan, not just a list of things that could be plans, until we get serious about it in the House and the Senate and things like that, we're going to keep throwing nickels and dimes at these much larger problems. I know it's frustrating to me when people call and they say, well, why aren't you guys fixing this stuff? And I said, I'm honestly trying, but I'm one vote out of 101. Senators, one vote out of 48. And until we get enough people to recognize that this is a problem and we kind of need to start looking at rebuilding the system from the ground up, we're we're going to be stuck in the situation we are.
There was other things besides the budget, believe it or not. We'll get to those here real quick, but the Real ID was a big win for both of you. Sunday alcohol sales will now go to the counties, if the counties want to go to that, for liquor stores to be sell open on Sunday. It never entered my mind to sell beer alcohol in a movie theater, and that came up. It never entered my mind that, you know, that's like going, it's entertainment. It's like going to a Dodgers game or to a Thunder game. It never rendered my mind that there was never.
You must not go to the movie theater in Stillwater there where I go then, because most of those kids, when I go to watch a new superhero movie, show up drunk already, and you think to yourself, well, if they're going to be drunk, I'm 30 years, I should be able to have a beer too.
It was interesting to watch back and forth a little bit on Facebook how people view that, but it never entered my mind. But I'm talking about your guys, how you did. AJ, you were public safety, education, 7 health field, corporation commission, EPA. Those are some things I took some brief notes on, but it looked like you had a good year.
I had another, individually, just another really productive year. Probably the bill that I'm proudest of is Senate Bill 727, and it's one that nobody's even really going to notice. It's a DHS reform bill that works on some things that are pretty simple, but it's collaborative between the department and child advocacy groups, including a national group called the Annie Casey Foundation that came in. They're doing a lot of technical assistance around our child welfare system. One of the things it hopes to improve is the involvement of birth parents in the process, because when you look at about 80% of the kids that go into state custody eventually go home. We really need to be involving birth parents along the way and truly creating bridge systems between the foster family and the birth family. So really proud of that one, but I think I was at 34 bills that made it through the governor's signature process.
Okay.
Which
Just
John
rubbing
laughs.
it in.
I know, that's why I just made brief notes on all of them when I was looking at
And
them.
a little bit of everything there. I'll have to run through them all, but I do want everybody to take a look. I'll be putting out columns, and I think I'm going to take the next probably 34 weeks and just highlight one piece every week so that everybody kind of knows what I've been working on. I still run a lot of legislation because I like to stay busy.
Mm-hmm.
You can get all that done if you're in the Senate and you have great House co-authors, which I think we did one together. I don't know that we got that one finished.
That one didn't pass, yeah.
It's still sitting there. We can finish it next year.
Yeah.
Talking about yours, I thought Representative Proctor was going after you for a little bit. I was like, man, after my buddy, I was like, hey, come on. He was teasing.
He was teasing me. They like to make a lot of fun of me, and that's fine. I ran a lot of bills dealing with the agencies in my subcommittee. It seems like all I've done all year is raise fees. I ran one for the Department of Mines that raised the fee per ton on non-coal aggregate material. It was currently at 1 penny a ton, now it's 2 pennies a ton, and it actually failed the first time in the Senate. Senator Fields had to bring it back for reconsideration to get it passed. A lot of my agencies aren't on the list of 15 considered core functions. They are still important, so trying to address things that can feed into them, a lot of fee changes just to make up from the times. And the odd thing about that is most of these fees are things that industry has actually come, the industry that they're regulating, and they say the Department of Mines is an important regulatory body, they're doing a great job. We're willing to increase the fee on ourselves to help them do a better job, to get our paperwork process faster, to help government function more efficiently. We ran a bill outlawing warthogs in the state of Oklahoma the last week. There was an issue that came up over in northeast Oklahoma. A guy wanted to start a feral hog hunting facility. We've put a moratorium on that. There cannot be any new feral hog hunting facilities in the state as we try to get kind of a hold and clean up some of the feral hog population we have right now. Well, this guy's no dummy, and so he did a little research, and he realizes that down in South Texas they actually have what they call red river hogs and warthogs, and they hunt them down there, and they don't currently fit under our classification of feral swine, so he was going to import them. To me, it was a no-brainer. Feral swine's a huge problem we face in the state of Oklahoma. They do billions of dollars worth of damage a year. If we could roll the clock back 20 years and stop them from coming in, we would do that. There's YouTube videos of these warthogs fighting off lions, and they reproduce at the same rate as feral hogs. It's just not a good direction we need to go into, but my friends and colleagues and people on the internet did have a a lot of fun with that bill.
You know, I watched that very topic on the floor, and I thought, okay, we'll get this passed. There was more questions than I ever thought. Did Representative Perryman break a record for most questions asked on the floor this year?
Boy, he sure might have.
You can tell he's a lawyer.
Representative Perryman has to be the designated questioner, attack dog, however you want to phrase that. It was his job this session to slow things down, ask some questions, and be Representative Perryman.
Yeah.
Which is a full-time
Will there be
job.
debate? Perryman, yes.
Yes.
Follow-up? Yes. He was very busy. But
And as frustrating as that is to people watching at home, it's just as frustrating as us. When you have the numbers as skewed towards one party and the other, like we do in the Oklahoma House, it's about 75-25. You don't have a lot of options other than just trying to slow the train down to make sure we don't pass things, or just to make people frustrated. It's not a great tactic. The only reason I don't completely lose my cool is I also remember that there was a time in state's history when the Republicans were the minority and we did the exact same sort of thing. It's sleazy political games, but it's unfortunately been played by both parties over our history of our great state.
8 short years ago, they always debate, like they'll debate the question and they'll end up voting for it anyway. Like, what did we just do here? But we've run out of time, and again, this is our second year we've got to do this, and we truly appreciate you spending some time. And you know, you can easily hide and not answer the questions, but we appreciate everything you guys did. I know it was a tough year, and I'm sure the emails were maybe up a little bit percentage points this year.
Well, in the interim, if you need anything, issues you want us to address, I'm still pretty easy to find. I think half of Guthrie has my cell phone number, so if not, ask Chris. He's got it.
That's right. Yeah, and the same with me. Please, I don't get as great a cell phone reception out where I live. Leave a message. Call you back.
Yeah, and, you know, as a whole, you know, the legislature got beat up a little bit this year. I'm sure it's like every single year, but I gotta be honest, every time I had a question for you guys, you answered it quickly, so I appreciate you guys doing that as well. So we'll do this for the second session beginning next year. Hopefully nothing in the summertime or early fall, but thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks, Chris.
For Senator AJ Gay-Griffin and Representative John Pfeiffer, I'm your host, Chris Evans. We appreciate you listening to The Roundup.